my friends, this is Mark Graham with the Source of Story YouTube channel and Runes for Writers. In this video, we're going to look at the 9 Worlds rune casting. This is the largest rune casting we have to date, using 9 cards, 9 runes for the 9 worlds. So we'll go through this. You can do this with tiles if you have them, or with the cards. And if you're using tiles, I want you to go ahead and shake them up well in your pouch or in the box that you store them in, just to get those good and mixed up. If you're using cards, if they're in order, I want you to give them 5 shuffles. This will give you a good complete randomization. If, like mine, they are already fairly mixed up, 3 shuffles will be great to get you a good neutral starting point. And to do this, we want to randomize them both in order and in orientation. So to do this, I use a riffle shuffle. We split the deck in half, turn them so end to end, and we have 1 shuffle for the Odin aspect. This is for Ve, the second aspect of Odin, and 3rd shuffle for Billy of the subconscious mind, the inner self. Okay, so our cards are good and shuffled, and we will go ahead and lay them out. So one thing before we start, I will say we're going to go from the center to the north and then clockwise all around to the 8 directions from the center. Now, I follow the ancient reckoning of north as down. For the ancients, the north was the direction of darkness as opposed to the bright sunlit south. So the farther north you went, the farther into darkness, the farther away from the sun, so the farther down you went. This is the ancient reckoning of the directions, and is my personal preference to use. If you prefer a modern convention, if that helps you keep things straight, that's fine. You can go from the center up, as long as you just then proceed clockwise, whichever direction you go to begin, just move on clockwise. Keep track of it for yourself, but you'll be in good shape there. You'll always be going north to east to south to west. So there we go. So we begin in the center, and this represents Midgard. I'll come back and go through all these. So we start in the center. Then we move to the north, then to the northeast, the east, the southeast, and the south, southwest, west, and northwest. So the first thing we want to do is record this layout so that we don't forget and that we have it with us. You can snap a picture of this. We will have our recording sheets as part of the set. So the first thing we want to do is record those. I'm going to do that now, and we'll be right back. Okay. Now, the 9 Worlds rune casting is among the most comprehensive layouts that we can do. The intent of this rune casting is to map out your complete story. Now, this won't give you a scene-by-scene breakdown, but it will give you the critical elements that can shape your story and bring it into fullness as you go into your drafting or outlining, or if you're a pantser, just as you jump right in. What is the 9 world reading? Well, in Norse cosmology, there were 9 realms or 9 worlds of existence that made up the universe. In the center, we have Midgard. This is Earth. This is the realm on which human beings go about and have their existence. This is the realm, the dimension, the plane of everyday ordinary existence. For the story, this represents the ordinary world. This is the character, the situation as it is. This is the beginning status quo and where we find our character at the beginning of the story. In the north, we have Niflheim, and Niflheim was one of the first worlds, one of the first realms to come into being. It is the realm of infinite potential, of unmanifest potential. It is the realm of the primordial waters out of which life comes into being. So this represents for the story the first glimpse of something more. This is, to use Michael Haig's phrase from Story Mastery, this is the opportunity. This is the moment when the character recognizes that there's something beyond the wall, that perhaps this limited existence is not all there is. So this is not necessarily the inciting incident, but it's the first moment, it's that moment of awakening to new potential that begins to stir the story into motion. It kicks the character off of equilibrium and begins getting things moving. That potential is beginning to come into being in the story. In the Northeast, we have Asgard, which many of you know from the movies and from the comic books. Asgard is the fortress of the celestial deities. These are not deities of time and space. We'll get to them later. These are the deities of timeless perfection. So what we have here, as it relates to the story, is something new. This is Michael Haig's Story Mastery, the expression of something, and then something happens. And that is this situation. This is the thing that kicks the story into drive. This can be toward the end of the Act 1. We don't necessarily need to get into timing the structure of all these pieces, but it would be about that point. This is the inciting incident. This is the crossing of the threshold as the character moves from the ordinary world into the extraordinary world, and that is represented by this rune in the Northeast in Asgard. In the East, we have, in Norse cosmology, we have the world of Jotunheim. This is the world of the giants, as literally giant home. We know, you're familiar with the character of Thor, and Thor is always, he lives in Asgard, but he's always in the East fighting the giants. So what does this mean? Some like to think that this, Thor is just a warmonger. He's out there and he's slaying giants left and right for no other reason than that they're giants. Not necessarily the case. I won't say it's wrong. I don't believe it's necessarily the case. The giants are forces of nature. They are expansive forces of nature. In and of themselves, they're not harmful. They are gravity. They are the tides. They are fire. They are old age and time. So they are just natural forces. They are not evil. They don't care. They just are what they are. Unrestricted, they will destroy us. They are also the nuclear force. So without balance, they will destroy all of creation. So as Thor goes out to battle these, he's bringing them into balance. He's not going to destroy them. We need gravity. We need tidal forces. We need time. We need fire. But they need to be restrained and balanced. And that is this notion of the East. What does this mean for your story? In the East, we see the forces of opposition that will balance the protagonist's action throughout the story. This will typically be seen as the antagonist. If it's a love story, we don't necessarily want to think of this character as evil, but it is a type of opposition to the character's status quo. It's an opposition to the character's forward momentum, or can be. So however that works for your story, that is represented here in the East. The forces or the characters of opposition, antagonism. Next is the Southeast, and this is the realm of Svartalfheim. This is the home of the dwarves or of the dark elves. Now these characters sometimes get a bad rap, but the dwarves and the dark elves, the Svartalf, were the craftsmen, the tinkerers of the gods. Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. This was forged by the dwarves, and its mighty power. And Thor's gloves, his belt, are also dwarf made. Odin's spear, Gungnir, which can be thrown and will never miss its mark, dwarf made. So this is the toolmaker realm. This is the subconscious realm, which for an individual, the subconscious is where your success or failure is rooted in your subconscious. You can set yourself up for success, or you can subconsciously sabotage your actions. So the realm of the southeast in your story, these are the allies or the tools or the mentor character. These can all be kind of signified by this rune. These are the elements or the characters that will help and aid the protagonist throughout the story, in the progression of the story, in moving toward the goal, to fulfill the desire line of the story. So we have the powers of opposition in the east. We have the forces of support and help and alliance in the southeast, in the realm of Svartalfheim. South is Fireholm. It is Muspelheim. This represents the activating force. So these are the elements in the story, or perhaps a particular scene or situation, which will drive the character onward. We locate it here in the south. This is the midpoint of the rune casting, and this may be what occurs around the midpoint of your story. Again, I don't want to dictate structure to you, but thematically, structure-wise, this represents the point of no return, wherever that falls in your story. This is, up to this point in your story, for the most part, the character has not necessarily known what all is going on, or has been drifting somewhat with the forces of the story. And with Muspelheim, with this activating element that occurs at this point in the story, this now kicks the character into gear and innervates that character to begin acting toward that end, toward the goal of the story. We have passed the point of no return, and now the character, rather than coasting, as he or she may have been during the early parts of the story, reacting, the character is now driven from within. That spark, that inner fire has awoken, and the character now becomes proactive toward the ultimate goal of the story, toward driving that to its finale. Next, we come to the southwest. In the southwest in Norse tradition, this is Helheim, the underworld. The Christian tradition has taken this and turned it into its realm of punishment and eternal torture. This was not the interpretation or the meaning of this realm in ancient times. It was simply the underworld, similar to Sheol in earlier Hebrew mythology, to Hades in the Greek and Roman traditions. So this is just the place after death. So we think of this as a place of transformation, of ultimate transformation in the case of literal death. But it is, in the story terms, this is the dark night of the soul. This is the all is lost moment. It can be as dramatic as your story requires. It could even, if you're into more fantastical or mystical elements, this could be a literal death and resurrection, or it could be the death of a marriage. It could be the death of an alliance, what have you. But this is that all is lost moment, the deepest, darkest night of the character's soul. And it is from this moment that they will either fail in the desire line, or they will rally, find what they need to move on, to be transformed, to be resurrected and reborn, and forge on toward the end of the story. Whatever your story calls for, this is that turning point in your story where death or life are in the balance, where success or failure are in the balance, and this turns the corner for the character in this situation. So next we have the West, and this is Vanaheim. We mentioned earlier Asgard, the home of the Aesir. Vanaheim is the home of the Vanir, and these are the gods of time and space. So in ancient Norse tradition, these were the fertility gods. This was the harvest, the sun, the ocean god. All the things having to do with human existence on the physical level of the earth. So we think of this also has to do with the five senses. So sensual pleasures, food, art, beauty, dance, sex, sexuality, reproduction. These are the things that are represented by and watched over and protected by the Vanir, by the gods of time and space, of physical existence. So what does that mean for your story? The West is the realm of reward. So this is the boon. This is that goal, the desire line of the story. And this rune can represent physically that. It can be the Maltese falcon, or it can represent the circumstances surrounding the attainment or the failure to attain the boon, what is sought after. That is, in a nutshell, what is represented by this rune in the West, in Vanaheim. Finally, we come to the Northwest, the ultimate rune of the story. The Northwest is Yggdrasil. It is the realm of the Light Elves. Now, the Light Elves, we know them from Lord of the Rings. In the Norse cosmology, they were also represented or thought of as the ancestors, those who have gone before us. In Western mysticism, we might think of these as the ascended masters. So these are the forces, could be the ancestral guardians, or even guardian angels, perhaps. But these are the forces, this is the realm that has been watching out for the protagonist, for the story in the long run. This also represents the return. The Northwest being at the end of the 9 worlds, this is the boundary between human existence and what is beyond. So this is a realm of departure even, or it can also be a return to source, if you will. So this represents, for your story, this is the return. We take it at that point. The story has spiraled back around, but it's a return now to the same place, potentially, to the ordinary world, but at a different level. If you look at this from the hero's journey, the character has gone on his journey, he has attained the boon or not, and he has returned to the ordinary world, but transformed. He or she has now been changed. And potentially, depending on the type of story, can bring that change to enlighten and to heal the ordinary world, or could return and now be an outcast, because with that transformation, they no longer fit into that ordinary world. Depends on the nature of your story. So this is the power of this. While the runes, there are only 24 runes in their various locations and positions, how you interpret this and where your creativity can go with this is unbounded, unlimited. But this rune represents that return. It represents the return to the ordinary world, or the refusal to return to the ordinary world, or the inability even to return. but it's centered around that notion, that completion of the story. This is the resolution of your story, however that unfolds. So there we go. We have the 9 worlds, we have the runes in their positions, and we have how they impact your story. So for my particular story, we have in the center, in Midgard, the ordinary world, we have Cano reversed. Now, Cano means birch, the birch tree. And the birch tree is called a pioneer plant. In the case of the Norse, with the retreat of the glaciers, this could also happen where I live in Colorado, after a forest fire, when the land has been cleared and denuded of life. The birch tree and its relatives are among the first plants to come back in and begin bringing life back to that area, to take that ashen soil, or in the case of the Norse, just the scrabble, the gravel that is left in the wake of the glacial retreat, and to begin planting new life there. So that's the nature of Cano. It is new life. Now, some people see in this rune the shape of a mother's breast. So we have that idea of nourishment, of caregiving, of bringing life into being. That is Cano. Here we have Cano reversed. So this suggests that the world, the ordinary world, is one of sickness, of disease, of not being cared for. Alternately, this could be of persons in a position where they should be giving care who are not doing so. This could be an abusive mother. In my particular situation, I see this as a blighted land, that there is, the crops are failing, there's drought, famine, life is not being given what it should. This is the ordinary world that our story begins with. And next, in the north of Niflheim, this is the opportunity. This is the first recognition that things don't necessarily have to be this way. This is that first push off of center for the character. And in this case, we have Elhaj. And Elhaj is the European elk, not the elk that we're familiar with in North America. The European elk is much more similar to our moose. So this is a large creature. This is a very protective creature, that they're not necessarily territorial, but they will fiercely defend their young. In the European elk, the antler span is huge. There have been recorded instances of a 13-foot antler span. This is many, many years ago, but even so, even today, the antlers are huge and formidable. And there are instances where a moose will kill its predator, it will kill a wolf, it will kill a bear with its enormous antlers and with its hooves. So it's that defensive stance. We can also see in this rune shape, for the Norse tradition, the idea of the shaman standing with his arms held out, standing between the gods and the tribe, the people, to protect them from the power of the gods, the unlimited destructive potential that the gods represent. So we have that notion of protection, of the shaman, of the mentor. And here we have this reversed. So this, to me, for my particular story, this is the first awakening of my protagonist. And this is a realization that a person, in my case, I believe it is the protagonist. This is the first realization that because he has not been fulfilling this role as the shaman, as the protector, because he has denied that role, he has made his people vulnerable, and perhaps he is the cause of this blight that is on the land. He's not yet taking action on this, but this realization begins to put the story into motion. So next, we have, it's I love the power of these runes, the way these are working out. Whether they are defining what the story becomes, or whether it just kicks something loose in my head, I don't know. I really can't tell you what it is. But without fail, the way this unlocks my own creativity is just so powerful. So we have in the northeast, this is the realm of Asgard. This is a view of the potential. This is the inciting moment, and the change that really gets the story into motion, that kicks the protagonist onto his journey and gets the story rolling. So here we have Ehwaz. Ehwaz is the Yew Tree, and the Yew Tree, it is there's speculation that the Yew Tree was actually what Yggdrasil, the World Tree, was related to. Some people think it was the ash, but there's a number of sound arguments to make that it was the Yew Tree. An interesting thing about the Yew Tree, a few interesting things. One, the Yew Tree emits the vapor from its sap is toxic and is actually a hallucinogen. So a shaman would sit under a yew tree, or actually inside. Sometimes they will die from the inside out. He would actually get inside the tree, and the narcotic effect of those vapors would put him into trance, into an altered state, and he would have his shamanic journey, his visions. It can also kill you if you stay there too long, so don't do that. But the yew tree will also, the branches will come out, and they're winding, viney, twining branches, and the branches can actually go into the earth, burrow through the ground, and then come up somewhere else in what looks like a new tree. So we have, in the sense of this yew tree, is transformation. Now the Ehwaz rune is sometimes seen as a negative rune. It can't be reversed, and so it's sometimes seen as a negative and inescapable rune. It does mean transformation, and that transformation can be as final as death and rebirth, or death and resurrection. Now, how that transformation is received by the subject, by the character, by the situation, will determine what level it needs to go to. It can be, you're not really happy in that job, so maybe you should quit and get a different job. It could be that. It could be a relationship, a marriage, a partnership being transformed or ended and turned into something else. It can be death, with or without rebirth. But it is that transformation on one scale or another. So here we have in the northeast, this is the inciting incident or crossing of the threshold. And here it is that transformation. And for my story, I'll still play around with this some more, but I believe this is a death, more likely a deposition or a removal from office for the main character, because he has allowed the land to go into blight, because he has neglected or failed in his position as the protector of his world. He is cast out. He is transformed from what he was into something very different, and now the story is in motion. This is beautiful. I love this. So next we have, it's interesting, so in the east, these are the forces of opposition. This can be the antagonists, it can be natural forces, but the primary conflict within the story. And this rune is Nauthiz, and Nauthiz means need or necessity. This is another rune that is seen often as negative. It could be emergency, bad things are about to happen. But I tend to look at this rune as necessity being the mother of invention, of innovation. So the shape of the rune is similar to a bow drill that could be used to start a fire. And for the Norse living near or above the Arctic Circle, having the ability to make fire is a very handy thing. There's a great need for that. So in this case, we have as a force of opposition that notion of necessity and innovation. Now, the interesting thing about innovation, it relies on the intellect. It's very mercurial. There is a problem, there is a need, and through the intellectual application of creativity, or of, I've done this before and this suits the need, so I'll try this again, and we come up with a solution. In this case, it appears that that notion of problem, reaction, response is actually going to hinder us. So we need, rather than trying to find the solutions to problems, trying to innovate a solution to these necessities, that will actually get in the way and create more harm than good as we move through the story. So that will be a theme throughout the story for me. Next, we come to the southeast, and the southeast is the realm of Svartalfheim. This is the position of allies and helpers. I'm sorry. It's fascinating how this works for us. We have Ansuz in this position, and Ansuz is the stands for the deities. For one interpretation is Godmouth. So it is divine communication, inspiration. So we find that, contrary to the previous rune of innovation, of more of an intellectual problem solving, which is actually going to get in our way, our greatest help in moving through this story is going to be inspiration, is going to be more intuitive, or messages from the divine, from mentors, from helpers. The notion of Ansuz suggests more of a divine source, and that plays into my particular story really well. So this is perfectly suited, and this, that listening to the gods speaking, to the whispers of the divine. These are the things. This is the type of activity, a way of being that will empower my protagonist and be able to help him as he moves through the story. We come to the south. This is the activating element. This is that fire, that inner spark from the midpoint, the point of no return. This is the spark that will propel the protagonist forward to the end of the story. And in this case, we have Sowilo. And Sowilo means the sun. It can also mean the soul. To the ancients, the sun was the soul of creation, the soul of the universe. And they saw that as reflecting the human soul as well. So in this position, this is the midpoint of the story, roughly. This is the point of no return. This is the revelation, the realization, the event that turns my character around, that takes him from reacting to being proactive in the story. This rune can also be seen as success. And this is an act where my character, rather than acting from his gut level, rather than from acting a knee-jerk reaction, rather than from acting out of habits, glimpses and acts in a way that comes from his soul, that comes from his highest being, his highest potential. And in acting from his soul, and the result that comes from that, of acting out of his soul drive, there's a recognition of the success that can come when he does this. So rather than acting because that's how people expect him to act, that's how he's always done it, that's his unconscious habitual response, ingrained reactions. When he acts from his purest essence, from his soul identity, power comes from that, success comes from that, and that realization will drive him to the end of the story. Love it. We come to the southwest. This is his night in hell. This is the deepest realization, where you come face to face, getting back into the generalization. Hellhome is where, as a soul has departed the body, where they come face to face with the totality of their life experience, for good and bad. This is the karmic revelation, a karmic reckoning, and we typically think of that as a bad thing. I hope karma gets you, but it's simply point to counterpoint. The soul has come into the world to experience certain things. They come to the end of that life, and in the underworld, they review things. Oh, I meant to do this. I did that instead, and I got this. I really wanted that, so I'm going to go back to get that. This is where the planning for the next incarnation takes place. So, for the story, this is that deep dark moment. This is the come face to face with reality moment. And here we have Hagalaz. Hagalaz literally means hail, the stones of ice that come out of the sky. It can mean a wide range of precipitation. It can be a hailstorm, it can be rain, it can be a drizzle, it can be snowfall. But it stands for that purifying element that comes from in Colorado, or that quietness, that peacefulness that comes with the first crisp snowfall of the season. It seems to renew the world. And this is another rune. I have most of the bad runes are in this rune casting. This is seen as, this is a purification rune, and that can mean purification that come with washing your hands or a pleasant shower, or it can be purification through fire, through destruction, through hailstones, if need be. The level of purification really is dependent on the character's willingness to be purified, to let go of the things that no longer serve them, and to be renewed, to be purified. This can be terribly destructive, or it can be very pleasant and soothing. So in this case, we have Hagalaz in the deep dark moment. This is coming out of a soul revelation and soul activation. This is the character's recognition of his need to be purified, his need to let go of what has been. So this is the my protagonist succumbing and giving in to that purification. I have a feeling as I get into this scene, it's not going to be entirely pleasant, but it will be a natural outgrowth of, again, the soul revelation from the preceding rune, and will definitely awaken my hero to his new way of being. This is, and it's also interesting that we have opposite this, right? We had the transformation rune previously diagonally opposite that got the story into motion, and we have the purification rune, sort of its counterpart, in the position that's going to bring the story to its conclusion. So it's a beautiful, lovely balance, and fits the mythic scope of my story beautifully. So I'm happy with this. This is great. Getting a little emotional about that, just recognizing both for in the story what this power is going to be and the power of these rune castings. This is real. I'm not making this up, folks. This is transcendent. So I welcome you into this amazing world. Okay, so now we move into the west, into Vanaheim, the home of the terrestrial gods, the deities of time and space. And this is the reward. This is the boon. And here we have Dagas. And Dagas, it literally means day. And we have in this both a balance of day and night, of light and dark, but there's also a sense of reward to this. So it's a reward in the reward position. It's actually, Dagas belongs in the west, so this is even reinforcing that some more. This is, in the case of my story, this is the reward, is finding balance, is the day being fulfilled and being restored and brought back into harmony. This is coming home from the fields at the end of the day. In our modern parlance, coming home from the office and from traffic. And that as we walk through the door and are among our loved ones once more, this is Dagas. This is that return, that welcome home. Love it. And finally, we have the Northwest. This is the Yggdrasil. This is the home of the light elves, of the elders, of the ancestors, the ascended masters. This is the return home. And for my character, we have Tiwaz. And Tiwaz stands for Tyr, for the god Tyr, or Tu. This is seen as, the Romans saw this as equivalent to Mars, as the god of war. However, in the Germanic world conception, this went much further. One of the most famous stories about the god Tyr, and one that's most potent and powerful for me. The gods were sitting around, and the son of Loki, the trickster god, was named Fenris, and Fenris was a wolf. And Fenris just kept growing and growing and growing. And he was a puppy. The gods, when he was young, they would play with him and he'd play fetch, what have you. But as he continued growing and growing and growing, the gods became concerned that he would ultimately devour the entire universe, that nothing else would exist to feed his endless hunger. And so the gods got together and conspired to bind him, to tie him up, to put a leash on him. Whatever they tried, with his great strength, he would just break the leash, and nothing could hold him. So finally, the gods went to the dwarves, to the dark elves. And remember, the dark elves and the dwarves are the craftsmen, are the skilled, the tool makers of the gods. So they went to the dwarves to create a binding that could hold this wolf. And what they came up with was a thread. Infinitely thin, gossamer silk, made of pure subtlety, made of the sound of a cat's fall, a cat's footfall, the look of a whisper. I'm butchering the myth right now, but it's these things that we know what they are, but they have no real physical expression. That's what this thread was made from. So the gods come to Fenris and they say, hey, let's play a game. We will tie you up with this thread, and if you can break it, you get a snack. Or whatever. Now Fenris is a hungry wolf, but he's also rather clever. And seeing that this is not much sport, if that's an ordinary thread, something is up. And he knows that the gods are very crafty. So he says, okay, I will agree to be bound by this thread if one of you agrees to place your hand in my mouth. And if I break it, great, we get the treat. If you're tricking me, I'm taking that hand. I'm clamping in. And the gods stand about and dither and bicker back and forth. And finally, Tyr comes forward and says, for crying out loud, I will do it. And Tyr is a warrior god. He is a fierce defender. But he places his sword hand. The myth doesn't specifically say which hand, but there's a general consensus that he places his sword hand in the mouth of the wolf. Sure enough, they bind the wolf. He tries to get free. He cannot. He clamps down, and Tyr loses, the defender god loses his sword hand. So that is represented in this rune. So it literally means the god Tyr, but we see in it the shape of an arrowhead or of a spear. So it is that weapon. This is defense, is the traditional definition. I really see this as honor, as forthrightness, as Tyr eschewing, doing away with all this subtlety and this cleverness and this trickery, and going straight to cutting to the chase and doing that which is honorable, as he stands in defense of, in the myth, standing in defense of creation, of the universe, from this destructive force, but also standing against subtlety, against trickery, against backstabbingness. So here we have this character who should have been in that role initially, in that role of the protective shaman, who has gone through all these experiences, these transformations and purifications, and has come home to his reward, and now stands renewed in that position of the honorable defender of his realm. And that is my story, and that is the Nine Worlds runecasting in its essence. I am Mark Graham of the Source of Story YouTube channel and Runes for Writers. This has been the Nine World Runecasting, and I look forward to hearing about your story in the runes.